Second World War. And the home was a detached house on a quarter-acre block, surrounded by garden, complete with a Hills hoist, barbecue and room for a cricket match. Well, now we've been told that dream is over and higher density living is the way of the future. Today, the ACT government announced its program called Own Place. It's a collaboration between builders and the Land Development Agency to provide house and land packages priced under $300,000. Affordable, yes, but is it livable? How will life in these new suburbs change? And where will the children play? Craig Allen reports on the Canberra housing market and the incredible shrinking block.
From small beginnings, the city and its environs are now spreading into the area of the Australian Capital Territory in all directions. New suburbs are springing up, for Canberra is growing faster than any other capital city of Australia.
For baby boomers, the Aussie backyard was a private utopia. It was the great Australian dream. But for the children of that generation, modern reality is a harsh wake-up call.
So, Craig, if you have a look at the distance from the house here to the fence to the neighbouring house, you're looking at something that's very indicative of the usual homes we're building.
Welcome to Canberra's suburbia of the 21st century. It's not an environment most of us are familiar with, but it's one more and more are expected to live in. We're in one of Canberra's newest suburbs, Ford. It's a subdivision being aimed at young families, but there's not a lot of room for the kids to play.
Around the back here, you've got the cricket pitch, but there's certainly no outfield.
No, that's right. There's the really close-in slips with a mouthguard. I suppose a lot of the marking tends to suggest that it's not about having a backyard, it's about being within walking distance to a common facility. I know in this suburb in Ford, which has been very popular, they suggest that from any particular block, you're within 200 metres walking distance to an open area where the kids can play.
So the new suburbs effectively mean an end to backyard play. If children can't make it to the communal playground, they're forced inside in front of the box or the home computer. It's a far cry from Canberra's early suburbs, which were often planned around neighbourhoods of quarter-acre blocks, roughly 1,000 square metres. There was plenty of room to kick a footy or duck under a pre-water restrictions sprinkler. Today, home buyers are lucky to get a plot half that size, and many are much, much smaller.
It's probably more pronounced in the last decade and a half, where you've seen the average household block go from 1,000 square metres to something around 700, perhaps even less. And I think also as part of that whole change process is the radical shift to very small block sizes to around 250 square metres in some cases.
Still, builders are really pushing the envelope, mostly at their clients' behest. They're plonking the biggest houses possible on impossibly small blocks.
But as a guide, you're looking at, on one side, 1.5 metres, so on your garage side, 1.5 metres from the boundary, and on the other side of the home, you're looking at 3 metres. To the rear of the home, 3 metres, and depending on what suburb you're talking about, you're looking at about 5-6 metres from the front.
I mean, you're smelling your neighbour's barbecue.
Absolutely.
You're hearing your neighbour's toilet flush.
Yep, definitely. Now, again, that's just the norm. That's what's happening. And I get the feedback from the older generations. They certainly sort of raise their eyebrows at that concept.
I can see for long-term Canberrans, they would see that there has been a change in the city. But for someone who's 35 years of age and been living in Canberra since 1977, I have a slightly different perspective on how this city should develop.
Planning Minister Andrew Barr says he's committed to offering maximum housing choice. That means a quarter-acre block, if you can find it and afford it, or a smaller, compact allotment if that's what the buyer wants. But the reality is there aren't too many large blocks on offer.
Your standard residential, in a suburb like Dixon, where I live, is around 600 to 800 square metres. So it has come down a little in some of the new greenfield areas, but again, it depends on the suburb and on the nature of the housing type.
The house that we're currently displaying here is on a 590 metre block. Now, not so long ago, that would have been a small block. That's just not the case. If someone walks in the door and they're excited about the fact that they've got a block of land and it's 500 plus metres, we consider that to be a bigger block these days.
But what is this new era of medium density living doing to Canberra's quality of life? Some say the amenity of our city is definitely suffering.
The more you go to these kind of tiny blocks on which you allow people to build very large houses, means there's less opportunity for you to grow trees and reasonable sized shrubs, which in turn means you don't have any bird life. It just disappears. There's no habitat for the flora and fauna in which we live. So it produces an environmentally arid kind of place. We don't need to recreate in Canberra the desolation of the suburbs of Baghdad, which is what we're happily doing in the same kind of low rainfall area.
Emeritus Professor Patrick Troy is one of the country's leading thinkers on suburban planning, and he's scathing about the way the government is carving up paddocks into postage stamp-sized blocks.
What we're now doing is actually trying to force a constrained choice, force people into small boxes, which aren't flexible, where they are subject to the pressures and complaints and rules established by people in bodies corporate and the like, and where their kids are basically, in order to secure the safety of the kids, they have to keep them inside. This is nonsense. I mean, it's not a way a civilised community should be looking at the way they develop, and it certainly is not sustainable in any sensible use of that term.
City planners argue much of this change is market-driven. That's to say, people increasingly want to live this way.
It's not to say that there isn't still demand for the larger house blocks, but that's reducing. That demographic is skewing away from the larger blocks, which are costly to maintain, and they're after a different product.
Well, it's fundamentally a bullshit argument, because the supply is the determinant here. There's a demand is big, but people will take whatever housing they can get. And if the supply of appropriate parcels of land is constrained, then they will, of course, express a preference for flats or medium-density housing, because there's nothing else and they can't live on the streets.
The building industry has long been critical of the government's land release policies, saying that land is being drip-fed to the market in the knowledge that developers and home buyers will snap it up at a premium price, regardless of how small the blocks are.
The ACT government have got a parcel of land, and let's call it Franklin, and they look at it and go, how can we divvy this up to maximise the profits? You've got a situation in the ACT where the Land Development Agency is the major land developer, and I just personally, and the feedback we're getting is it's very much about the case of, how do we maximise the return on this particular dirt.
Do you think developers are being greedy, trying to squeeze in as many blocks in their subdivision as possible?
No, I don't think we can say that, because it's a combination of both market forces and government policy that is bringing about this change. And whilst it's not to suggest that the property sector doesn't derive more income from getting a greater yield on the land, it's not necessarily they're being driven entirely by their interest in making more profit out of the land.
As if to prove the government's point, buyers are lapping the blocks up, even the tiny ones. Not because the land's necessarily cheap or because they want a small block, but simply because it's available. Some of the smallest blocks are being sold as affordable housing plots, purportedly to help first home buyers crack into the extremely tight Canberra market.
And sitting where I sit, talking to potential customers who have just purchased a block of land, in some cases now less than 300 metres, for 300 square metres, calling it a housing block, it's just phenomenal. And if you do the maths, you very quickly work out they haven't got a bargain. They've just got a very small block of land at the exact same metre rate as the bigger blocks of land that are being offered.
Governments and planning bodies argue there are strong environmental reasons for selling smaller blocks, because it's forcing Canberrans into a smaller ecological footprint.
We need a higher level of density, most particularly for the sustainability of public transport, and to reach a number of important environmental goals around the impact our new suburbs have on the environment.
It sounds like a more sustainable place to live, but is it going to be a happier place to live?
Oh, is that the $64,000 question? No one can predict that. I think climate change raises all sorts of prospects of the fact that communities and individuals are going to have to change their behaviour, change their consumption patterns.
The economic reality is the ACT government relies heavily on cash from land sales to pay for the services we all enjoy. And the sooner the government sells off the farm, the quicker it runs out of a valuable revenue supply.
There's clear evidence that we just cannot continue with a suburban sprawl on quarter-acre blocks that might have been a planning and social outcome of the past. That Canberra will eventually, of course, run out of land.
So, for the foreseeable future, get used to this.
You'd have to know your neighbours pretty well.
Yeah.
You'd have to get on with them pretty well, otherwise it'd be
John
tough.
passed the salt.
Danny Mellor's work includes kangaroos made out of ceramics, wood and feathers. If you saw the Culture Warriors exhibition at the National Gallery, you won't have missed him. Danny Mellor has just received a major art prize and he's based right here in Canberra. He commutes to teach at Sydney University and has also just completed his doctorate. His home in Canberra is also his studio and I met him there for a chat about life and art. And a warning to Indigenous viewers, this story contains images of a person who has died.
My feeling is art is almost like a reflective medium, in the sense, on an individual sense, and also in a broader sense as well. So it can reflect sort of individual values, attitudes and beliefs and so on, and in a broader sense it can reflect those of society or nationality and so on.
And it's his own rich cultural heritage mix from which Canberra-based artist Danny Mellor draws inspiration.